Hello and welcome back to Reading Between the Lines, hosted by Carson Keppel. And here is where we will discuss 5 literary elements found east of Eden. And the first of these literary elements I will discuss is character. Character is very important in narrative because of how it ties in to commentary on the real world and certain characters of people that are in the real world. For example, one of the characters here has a allegory towards a biblical character. And now I will discuss setting as the second literary element. And setting is a very interesting part of a story because it provides a background and oftentimes a mood for a story. And most of the time, its function in particular is to set up sort of an idea or a concept for a specific part or section of a story indirectly for the people who are truly paying attention so that they can get sort of an introduction to what the story could be about. And one of these ideas is the presence of Kathy as an idea of pure evil, and in the terms of the biblical allegories that Steinbeck creates, she is most similar to Satan, of all things. For example, in chapter 12, page 135, we have a quote that says, Kathy moistened her lips with a little pointed tongue. Now, a little pointed tongue, um, that is very commonly attributed to Satan, and and often is attributed to Kathy among other traits. For example, she gets very much upset when she cannot penetrate the the spirit of others. In particular, Adam Trask towards the end of the book, when Adam comes to her bar, he wants to talk to her, see how she's doing, and she gets mad when she cannot make him hate her or make him angry, make him come to her side, come to hell. Similarly to Adam Trask, Kathy is unable to corrupt Lee in the quote of in chapter 15, page 163, she's unable to penetrate the dark brown of his eyes, end quote. Right here, Lee is incorruptible, and that's part of the reason that she doesn't like Lee. However, she also sees him as wise later on in the book when she tells Adam Trask to get advice from him. And finally, just to tie back to the moistened her lips with a little pointed tongue, moistened her lips in particular is interesting because the way you would moisten your lips is to lick them. So licking your lips often obviously is to like it is to be salivating mischievously at what you're about to enjoy. And this quote is when Kathy is trying to make the doctor feel sorry for her. Her ability to manipulate people is so makes her so happy, similar to Satan when he can control the emotions of others. And through the comparison of Kathy to Satan, Steinbeck perfectly encapsulates the biblical retelling of sorts through different specific stories, or just one or two specific stories of, at the time, a more modern version of Cain and Abel and Adam and Eve, with original sin, the devil, and two brothers fighting. Next of the 5 literary elements is setting. Now, setting is due to time, place, and that's pretty much it. And in this particular instance, the setting of where the young Trasks, Aaron and Cal, grow up affects the way they act, especially towards women. But it isn't just Aaron and Cal. For example, Tom and Adam, for example, they both have a sort of fixation on their duty and their purpose to help women to such an extent that their lives are nothing without it at some points. Adam eventually gets over this, but Tom, he doesn't quite get the chance to. How would we say that? He doesn't quite get the chance to. For example, when Will is talking to Desi as she's about to come home, he says, Tom's not himself. You shouldn't be alone with him. This is because Tom doesn't really have a purpose in life at the time. But once Desi comes home, he is talking so happily. On chapter 33, page 398, in fact, it says that his face lighted with joy. That's just a total 180 from the time before. Under normal circumstances, one would say that, oh, he's meeting a family member he hasn't seen in a while. Of course he'd be very happy. But Will made it seem like even that wouldn't make him happy, so that isn't even valid in this case. The amount of happiness and joy that Tom expresses is so abnormal for his character at this point that it has to be something else other than just a normal family member occurrence. Moving on, my third literary element is structure. And for structure, my thought is, how does structure of speech craft commentary and ideas surrounding characters? Lee in particular. Now, Lee, his structure of speech is the most notable out of anyone, and it changes the most. For example, in line, on page 161, chapter 15, he says, I bring lit a table, when requested by Kathy, of course, to bring a table. And he does this, as he said to Samuel, just because he can't reveal himself to the rest of the world, or not the rest of the world, to Americans who aren't really ready for it. And it sort of encapsulates the stereotype around Asian Americans, especially in the early parts of the 20th century. The not quite persecution until World War II, but they definitely had a stereotype around them, exactly as Lee says on chapter 15, page 163. 163. He says, "Pidgin they expect and pidgin they'll listen to, but English for me they don't listen to, and so they don't understand it." And again, that's exactly what I'm trying to say, as structure shapes the concepts of how Steinbeck tries to make commentary on the stereotypes of Asian Americans. In a way, this structure of speech that is pidgin and simply just not quite gibberish, but it is broken English, is a way for Steinbeck to help the reader understand the way that Asian Americans are expected to seem. They're expected to seem blabbering and ridiculous to the Americans in the Western area in the time period the book was written. Moving to my fourth literary element, we're on to narration. Now, the speaker the narrator of East of Eden, and their perspective is not a second or first person. It's a third person. However, the third person is not completely absent from the story. They still have a very minor role in that they're a part of the lineage of the Hamiltons, and Just in the first page alone, you can see the significance of having a narrator who is not quite completely absent from the story, like basically someone in the sky just telling us a story about a magical land, versus someone who is in the story but not who has relation to the story but is not actually in it, if that makes sense at all. For example, in this first chapter, page number 1, we get to see all the beautiful imagery given by this speaker. It says, I remember my childhood names for grasses and secret flowers where a toad may live, and what time the birds awaken in the summer, and what trees and seasons smelled like, how people looked and walked and smelled even. The memory of odors is very rich. End quote. Now, the imagery is not only an image, of course, it's also a sense of smell. It's also about the nature. It's about sight. It's about plants. And not only just that, it also has a semblance of what the Garden of Eden was in a sense before everything got messed up with Adam and Eve. And this sort of sets the tone for the original sin that Cyrus commits, not in the story, but is said to have committed in the story. That affects, that is affected through Charles and Adam and down that lineage. But all that beautiful imagery is, in my opinion, possible due to the presence of a third person narrator. While I don't think it would have changed if the third person narrator was just not mentioned as a specific person, I believe if it was a first person or a second person, the presence of this would not work nearly as well, because otherwise then the imagery would fall through the narration of a specific character, and I don't believe that looking at it through a specific lens of another character would fit the same way as it does from an outsider. And of the literary elements, we are at the last one, which is figurative language. My example of that is Charles's scar. Charles's scar is very similar to the mark of Cain. Number one, Charles cannot, he doesn't leave Connecticut or the farm, unlike Adam, his brother, who is more of a nomad and moves all over the place. And Charles, very similar to Cain, is always very jealous of of or was always jealous of Adam's attention from Cyrus. And even similar to his eventual son that he never knew of, Cal, he's afraid of his evil actions. But instead of saying his evil actions, Charles is afraid of the scar, whereas Cal is afraid of his evil actions. Charles says on chapter 15, page 160, Adam, the scar on my forehead isn't going away. I'm afraid. Yeah, again, he says he's afraid the same way that Cal said he was afraid of the evil actions that he did to Aaron. So Charles, since his scar doesn't keep going away, his evil actions don't either. He, he his horrible action of just taking Adam's wife, but while she did agree to it, it's still evil of him, obviously, to do that to his brother. Um, again, going back to structure, um, not to jump around, but this is still a part of the same quote. The I'm afraid is very interesting due to the placement of the sentence. As I said, the I'm afraid part could be interpreted as, oh, I'm afraid that, I guess that this scar isn't going to go away. Or it could be interpreted as I said earlier, I'm afraid. The scar isn't going away. I'm afraid. Now, while a period may have been better in the sentence for the I'm afraid, for it to say the scar isn't going away, period, I'm afraid, I still believe that the comma was used just to make the flow seem more natural, and that it's more used as a double meaning, in that he is afraid, and it's an, oh, I guess that the scar isn't going away. The symbol, which is a form of figurative language, of the scar is a very obvious allusion to Cain from Cain and Abel. And now that concludes our episode of Reading Between the Lines. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope I get an A. And that is besides the point, but I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next week. Not really.